Bet you're wondering what this program is all about. The title sure gets your attention. End in Mind. Now, don't worry, it's not all about the end, as in death and dying. Rather, it's about living your life with intention and purpose throughout and until the end. I'm Cathy Wurzer. You see me on Almanac here on this station and hear me on Minnesota Public Radio. I'm also the host of a new initiative in Minnesota called End in Mind. We've been in a number of communities from Ely to St. Cloud, Laverne to Owatonna. We use music, poetry, art, and interviews to spark community discussions that explore what it means to live with a serious disease, disability, or terminal illness. We talk about the choices we make throughout our lives and certainly the choices we make when it comes to end-of-life planning. We try to have honest, fearless conversations about living and dying. This effort is made possible with major funding from Allina Health and health partners in the Twin Cities. The End in Mind project is in the Twin Ports to get some of these conversations started and encourage new efforts like Honoring Choices Duluth Communities and other locally based events you'll hear more about a little bit later on. Having these kinds of these life-affirming conversations isn't easy, but they are so very worthwhile and incredibly important, not only to individuals and families, but throughout the entire community. Duluth Mayor Emily Larson is with us and knows a thing or two about community engagement and the gifts that come from having these kinds of heartfelt conversations. Yeah. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you too.
Thank
you for being
so
here.
much.
Yeah.
Say, let me ask you this. I know you had a family member that died recently, and I'm so very sorry about that.
Thank you.
Describe the kinds of conversations your family was having as this loved one was leaving us.
Yeah, it was a beautiful departure he had. It was my stepfather, loving, tremendous. We were very, very close, and he was living with ALS disease. So something you know about, a very difficult disease to witness. And we were able to have such a beautiful series of conversations, and his release was filled with love because we were able to provide what he needed. He was able to communicate what he needed. All of that decided ahead of time. And, you know, really to watch my mom be able to be present to losing her partner with all the love and joy that that she could do that with it's been really beautiful, very difficult, of course, but it was a really important release that he was able to have on his terms.
Were you all able to have these very honest conversations about what it means to live into one's death?
Yeah, we did. And you know, that's part of being this really vibrant family, as our discussions have always been really intense and interesting throughout the years. And you know, my husband and I have had these conversations as well, as we've lost people in his family that we've loved, his brother, his mother. And you know, so these are the conversations that we've taken into our own home about what is it of our intent, what's important to us, what are the decisions we need to make so that, you know, I mean, research shows us this does happen to everybody.
That's what I've heard.
So when that happens, we are able to be present with one another and understand that those decisions have already been made.
You know, Duluth seems to be well suited to have these kinds of conversations, especially within a larger community like this.
Yeah, that's right. We are a really fully engaged community. So we have high voter turnout, which always turns into high volunteerism, high financial giving to institutions. All of that really translates to a really strong social connection we have with one another. And in the city of Duluth, about 15% of our population is 65 and up. So that's something to consider. We're an aging population, and a lot of people and families need to be having this conversation. But even more importantly, about 65% of the population is between 18 and 65. So these are the caregivers. These are the people caring for the generation above, the generation below. And this conversation about end in mind, about having these difficult discussions and important choices, this is really important for people of every age because there's a lot of living to do. And you get to do it more fully and with greater joy when some of those conversations have already been had.
You know, you are such a good community organizer. That's what your background has always been till you've gotten here to be mayor of Duluth. Yeah. How would you coalesce a community around having these conversations? It's kind of a difficult thing, I would think. Where would you start?
Well, it can be difficult, but I have found that in this community, people will gravitate towards a difficult conversation. Our Twin Ports community, Duluth, we don't really shy away from tough conversations. We're willing to have them. Some of that is just the proximity and the way we care for one another here. But I think, to me, it's really about positioning it. And when I talk with people about it, I talk about, well, what kind of release would you want for your loved one, for yourself? What's important to you? Because I can tell you that when you're standing saying goodbye to somebody, that's not the time to be, deciding things. That's the time to just be there and be grateful. And so how do you protect the best intent of who you love, but also send them forth with great joy?
Can you see having these conversations on, say, the city and county level with some of the employees here?
I know, I've been thinking about that actually. So the city of Duluth, we have 800 plus wonderful employees. They care for the city all day long. And there are residents, and then many of them, of course, go home and caregive, right? Just like the rest of us. We have parents and children. And so we have started that conversation as an organization. What can we be doing to help ensure that our staff have what they need to feel like they can have those conversations, or some tools to begin those conversations? So this has really spurred me to think about, as an organizational leader, how can I make sure that our people feel like they can be a part of this and have that same release or joy or planning or confidence that they need to move through with their daily lives.
So final question here, because of the death of your stepdad, death serves as a kind of a wake-up call, and as you said, no one gets out of this alive.
That's right.
But when this happens, you start to really realize this isn't forever. So have you found yourself, after your stepdad's death, looking at the end in mind a little bit more?
Absolutely. This year has been so interesting. I think I've lost 4 or 5 people I really love. One of them my best friend, another my stepfather. It's been a very transformative year in terms of really understanding how do you want to move forward with purpose and clarity in your life, and focus on what's important, and let the noise be the noise, but also really continue to have those discussions now, because those ends come sometimes when we least expect it.
You have been a fantastic guest.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Mayor Larson, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Cathy.
Appreciate it. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks.
Well, the End in Mind project, of course, is the result of conversations I had with the late Bruce Cramer on NPR News from 2011 until his death in 2015. Cramer was a former college dean. He had ALS, a disease he called the best teacher he had ever had. Bruce had amazing insights into the gifts of living that only dying can bring. His disease allowed him to live with greater awareness, vulnerability, and love. A lot of love. Do you remember the first time that we sat down together and talked about this project for NPR? What did you think at the time?
Well, I had real mixed feelings. I remember that our mutual friend who got us together thought this would be a great idea. I wanted to tell people that being diagnosed with a disease like ALS was no reason to be afraid.
As we've talked very openly about how this is going to end, people don't want to talk about dying. And we've tried to kind of open that conversation. Do you think we've been successful?
I don't know. I get a lot of communication from people where they have said to me that I have said things that they have thought but were afraid to say. So in that respect, I would say there is success. I think we both discovered that together, that as you and I would talk, we would see things that, because we were so present in the moment, we weren't afraid of the future, and the past was worth letting go of. I think we were able to see how beautiful this could be. And of course, death is nothing more than a telescope. You point it up to the stars, and they cease being fuzzy, and they come into focus. And that, I think, we've been able to do. I feel like in a lot of ways, what you have done for me is given voice to the things that I know, that I needed to be able to say, and done it in a way that has helped other people to think about the same types of things. We don't have to be afraid.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Cathy.
So how does someone live as fully as possible with a life-limiting or life-threatening disease or serious disability? Bruce Cramer was a great example, but there are so many other people living the exact same way. I met our next guest during the first community event we had in November of 2016 in Ely. It was a full crowd at Vermilion Community College. We had some wonderful guests, but I was struck by Mike Rouse's story. Mike's a music teacher at Ely High. He does a lot of the school musicals. He's got a busy family life. He's been living with cancer, a rare type that doctors thought was going to kill him more than 40 years ago. It keeps reappearing and Mike keeps batting it back. You could say the cancer is living with him instead of the other way around. I'm so pleased that Mike Rouse is back. How are you, my friend? Good to see you.
Very well. Good to see you.
Thank you. Well, cancer, as you know, is a roller coaster.
Absolutely.
So where are you on the ride?
Just ongoing. My doctors call it whack-a-mole. My cancer keeps metastasizing to various parts of my body, and when it pops up, they take care of it for me.
Where is it?
Well, last summer I had a bunch of lymph nodes taken out of my neck. 3 weeks ago I had 2 tumors taken off the lower lobe of my right lung, and so we always are just kind of keeping an eye on it. And once again, when it pops up, I let the doctors deal with it.
Okay, well, I was going to say, obviously, you clearly have a lot of doctors. You go through tests and procedures, and when you and I have talked in the past, it just seems exhausting. And I'm curious, how have you navigated life all this time with cancer?
Well, interestingly enough, in many respects, I consider cancer almost a gift. I had cancer first time when I was 17, and my doctors gave me approximately 5 or 6 years to live. And so my perspective on life, my priorities in life over a gradual set of time started changing. And it changed my life, I think, for the better. And in fact, to steal your title, I think I've kind of had the end in mind for the last 47 years, and in a very, very positive and good way. It's shaped my profession, what I've chosen to do in my life. It's shaped where I live, and many, many other gifts. And it has been quite a gift to me.
How has your view of mortality changed throughout this time?
My mortality.
How has your view of mortality changed throughout this time?
Mortality actually has really never concerned me too much. And I tell people once in a while, I have somebody say, how do you sleep at night with this in your body, and you know it's there and it's going to pop up again? And the truth of the matter is I don't even think about it. And in fact, I tell people, if the lights went out tomorrow, if that was the end, I've been the most lucky, blessed person alive. I've had a very, very wonderful, good life. I couldn't ask for anything better, and I wouldn't change anything.
I'm curious about the effect of all of this on your family. Now, as you know, folks who are living with a chronic illness, a life-limiting illness, their families can suffer, right? It's a very difficult thing to watch your loved one live with something as terrible as cancer. How's your family navigated this? Have you been closer together because of it?
I'm the lucky one because I do have cancer, and I think when I first got it, my parents suffered very, very greatly. My wife knew me 3 months without cancer, and she signed on to this big, long, hard trip. And in many respects, I think without her doing a lot of this organizing and getting me to the appointments and all the things I need, I might not be here. But one of the things that I really have been thinking about a lot lately is how important community, family, church, all of those things have been in my life to make my life what it is. I once again have been very blessed with good people and good family.
How has music helped you navigate this journey?
Well, as it turns out, I was quite good in math and science when I was young, and I was originally in high school. My people in school thought I should go into engineering, which was my father's profession, and but my love was music. And once again, this is one of the wonderful gifts that I had with cancer. When I was terminal, all of a sudden, all the people around me said, thinking that I was only going to live a few years, that I should maybe go to college and study music. And so it was like this giant weight lifted off my shoulders. And so lo and behold, I went to college, I studied music, and I've spent my whole life doing the one thing that I love, which, going back to what I said earlier, with the end in mind, so many times I think people do things for a long time that they are not excited about, and I've spent my whole life doing the one thing I've loved most, and I do think that's part of overall health and overall well-being.
You know, there are some people, Mike, not you obviously, that tend to sleepwalk through their lives until they get that diagnosis and it hits them. They think, oh my gosh, my time here is not as long as I thought. I'm wondering, your wake-up call was when you were quite young. You've managed to stay in the present all this time, right? How do you not get ahead of yourself and worry about the next thing? As you say, your cancer is like whack-a-mole. How do you not worry about that?
Once again, it's been a constant in my life. I don't even think about it. It's just my life. It's the way it is. It's like anybody else has their life situations and that become the norm, and cancer has become my norm.
What advice would you give people who are watching, who may be dealing with something pretty serious and they're not sure where to turn? What would you say?
I would say, once again, have the end in mind. Do what you love to do. Surround yourself with the people that you love. Surround yourself with the things, the music or whatever it is that you love. And I would also say, even for the people that the end isn't necessarily near, the events of the last few weeks remind us that sometimes, tragically, we get surprised. And so even if you're wonderfully healthy and expecting to live many, many years, consider the end in mind and do the things that you love and surround yourself with the things that you most love.
Always good advice. You know, I can't tell you how happy I am that you are here and that you're doing well and you've got such a great outlook on life. Mike Rouse, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you. Mike Rouse knows the healing power of music, absolutely. And words can heal too. Poetry comes to mind. Poetry can inspire or illuminate parts of life to the reader or listener that have never been considered before. Here's Duluth poet Ann Glumac with her original poem called Prayer on the Cusp.
Prayer on the Cusp. When I die, as I die, let me remember this. Late September sun streaming through the cattails, creating long, thin panes of green and gold stained glass. An insistent southern breeze dancing over the bay, quaking through the willows and the aspen. A good dog, hot and happy, panting by my side. My heart full, although I know what is to come. This is enough. It is enough.
Thank you, Ann. Our End in Mind programs talk a lot about living with intention, being more present to what the lessons are or gifts in any situation, accepting what is instead of trying to control or change the situation. Instead, much like many of the people we meet who are living with life-changing illnesses or disabilities, we look at what's still possible in life in spite of difficult circumstances, how to keep growing until the end. Duluth-based musician, singer, and disability advocate Galen Lee lives her life in that manner. Galen hit the national spotlight just a couple of years ago when she won the National Public Radio Tiny Desk Concert Contest, and she's been on a roll ever since. Her latest CD is Learning How to Stay. Here is the amazing Galen Lee singing I Wait.
Can you see me way back here? I've been waiting in line. It's been a long time, can't get no service. Still I am hoping for a sign. That one day things will change and we can finally take our place. That history won't forget us or try to minimize our pain, and so I wait. And so I wait. Did you know that when I get angry, I breathe fire? I could burn this place down. You may not realize all of the small ways I am not welcome, but just take a look around. Still, everybody knows that you need a place to go, and living isn't easy if you incinerate your home, and so I stay. And so I stay. I may seem angry, so please forgive me, but I am still not free in this society. How long must we keep fighting for our rights to be living? Wrongs overdue for righting. We're a bit too forgiving. So if you hear them make claims of progress, take a good look and see who isn't there. We need a seat now at the table, so please invite us, or don't pretend to care.
How you doing,
I'm
Galen?
doing good. How are you?
I'm great. Can I have a fangirl moment?
Yeah, sure.
You're amazing.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us.
I'm so glad you asked me. Thank you.
You know, so that is from the new CD, Learning How to Stay.
Yeah.
I Wait.
Yes.
Does this have anything to do with what I've heard you talk about living in the gap?
Well, that song to me is about the disability rights movement, and in particular, feeling like we're being left out of discourse, social discourse, and healthcare debates, and so in a way, yeah, living in the gap. The concept for me of living in the gap is, if you're a person with a disability, you're often not taken into account, and that can be really negative, but it was a way to realize that really all the standards that people try to chase after are man-made anyways, and so not being included in that dialogue kind of allowed me to just be like, well, the standards are kind of artificial anyways.
And do you feel you're being included in the dialogue about living as fully as possible?
No, I mean, I think there's not very many authentic dialogues about disability that get a lot of airplay. You know, you hear a lot about the victim, the tragedy, the inspiration,
right?
But not a lot about just like a real person. And then you hear a lot of ideas of like, for example, in the healthcare world or the healing world of like medicine and all those things, the idea that somehow, there's something inherently wrong with you. Where I like to think about disability as more of a spectrum, sort of like any other form of diversity. It's like a spectrum that moves in your lifetime too. And so to take away the negative stigma of disability and to talk about it as just like a part of diversity rather than like a negative thing that you either have or you don't have, just taking the negativity away from it and just seeing it as a different way to exist, because then you can exist freely and fully in whatever realm it is that you inhabit, and there's not all this negative judgment or like pity attached to it. You know?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
You know, we have a project here called End in Mind. And every person we talk to, we ask this question. So you ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, I want to know, how would you live differently if you lived with the end in mind?
Oh, well, I mean, I think I try to live with the end in mind now. But I think I would probably spend less time worrying about things that won't matter in 100 years. I bet, you know what I mean?
But you do live with the end in mind?
I think so. If you have a disability like mine, I mean, overall, it doesn't affect like the idea of my life expectancy per se, but since my bones are more brittle, at any time they could break, right? And if I got in a big car accident or whatever, that, you know, who knows what the outcome would be of that. And so I think one thing that my disability is like a gift and a curse at the same time gave me is that at a pretty young age, I mean, I got hit by a car when I was 21. And so, and I lived, but it was really like kind of the person with brittle bones' worst nightmare, right?
Right.
And I think it just becomes clear that you're not immortal kind of at a younger age than most people have to deal with that idea. And so, but that being said, I still worry a lot. So like, you know, if I really was living with the end in mind, I probably wouldn't do that.
You know, a lot of people, as you know, in our culture, figure that they're going to live to be 100, look great, and then drop over. I mean, no one really thinks about,
Yeah.
you know, that there is an end.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, you know, with your music, I mean, how do you use music to kind of move through some of those difficult?
Well, a lot of my
thoughts?
songs are about that concept of like being present, because I think being present is a way to deal with that, right? Like, even if you do know that the end is coming or whatever, being present is the only real place to exist, right? And so that's what a lot of my music is about. And then, you know, music is just really good for you. Like, it helps cope with all sorts of things like anxiety and depression, and it's just kind of, you know, it's a good thing to do, and it connects me to, I'm not very good at meditating, but I feel like playing music is that part where you have to be really present and in the moment, and I think that's a good practice.
You are awesome, my friend.
Oh.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
People cling to your light, but no one sees you, no one sees you. Keep your why, it's all a lie. Where's your heart? Where's your heart today?
At the top of the show, I mentioned a couple of community efforts in Duluth that hope to normalize conversations about death and dying and get folks thinking about their end-of-life wishes. Honoring Choices Duluth Communities is a new partnership between Essentia Health and St. Luke's in Duluth. Dr. Mary Boylan is a cardiothoracic surgeon at St. Luke's, and Dr. John Sandy is a hematologist and oncologist with Essentia. Good to see you both.
Thank you. Great to see you,
Thank
Cathy.
you. Well, you know, Mike Rouse, I thought was an interesting guest to have. Boy, I tell you, talk about a life well lived. How many patients have you run into, Mary Boylan, who are like Mike Rouse? I mean, what's the secret to some of these folks that seem to be defying the odds?
That's a great question. You know, we see people, and I can tell you that I have taken care of patients who you would think would not do well going through an operation because they have if you look at just the numbers and the objective data, but then they go through a whole big process, and for them it's like nothing ever happened. And you know, a specific example is I remember a couple where they were raising their son who had trisomy 21 Down syndrome, who was an adult, and these people, the patient was in his 70s and their son had survived to their 50s and should have been a big deal to have surgery, And that person was so motivated to get better, to go back, to take care of someone else, that they flew through things, just flew through the whole procedure like nothing. So how do they draw that out of themselves? I don't know, but it's almost magical to see when they're focused on maybe not themselves so much.
Dr. Sandy?
I wish I could identify what helps people do that, because if I could learn about it, I'd try and help other people to do it. I think about that often. I care for at least a dozen patients that shouldn't be alive, and they are. There's a certain intensity. There's also a certain openness. And while they struggle, it's not in a resenting kind of way. I think Mike was a beautiful example of acceptance and perseverance and focusing on what's really important. Those are the things that I find common in those kinds of folks.
You know, I know you both are trained to fix what ails a person, but if there is no fix, I bet you probably have had some pretty difficult conversations in your careers with folks who are, facing a very difficult health situation. And are doctors trained to have these conversations in medical school? I mean, what's the training for something like this?
You want to take that one?
Well, I'd say that I think things are different today because this is a conversation that is had today in communities. But I don't remember any formal training in how to interact with people, how to connect with a person, because really I think a large part of us as care providers at any level, physician, nurses, any level, is really connecting with that person and figuring out what's important to them and finding what motivates them. And it's, it almost seems that magical connection with someone, because then you can draw out, you can help them find out what is going to help them as well. And they're not just, a thing, they're a person, and they bring many dimensions. I think it was said, family, friend, community, spiritual, social, all those things. And I think that's a big part of helping someone heal or get through a process, whatever it is.
Dr. Sandy?
I consider myself a recovering oncologist because I think we do too much to too many people for too long with too little benefit for too much suffering. I went through 20 years of medical training and graduate school in ethics, and no one ever taught me how to have these conversations. So I've dedicated the last 8 years of my life learning how to have these conversations and working with other people to spread that through our organization and now through the community.
Let me ask you about this effort in Duluth. It's really exciting to have Essentia and St. Luke's working together. Usually there's this bit of competition, but y'all are cooperating on Honoring Choices Duluth Communities. What is the goal here? I mean, how to open these conversations community-wide? Dr. Sandy?
Well, I think Mayor Larson spoke very well about this. Some people think death is a forbidden topic. I agree with Bud Hammes from La Crosse, who says...
We're respecting choices.
Respecting choices, who says it's not that we avoid these conversations, we don't know how to be intimate and vulnerable at the same time. So we need to learn and teach techniques to learn how to ask questions in an appropriate, non-threatening way that lead very naturally to these kinds of conversations. I had 3 of them in my oncology outreach practice today in Moose Lake. They were very emotional, very difficult, but to me that's more of a success than prescribing a 3rd or 4th or 5th line chemotherapy that has 10% chance of working.
Dr. Boylan?
I would say that's exactly right, because medicine is so advanced. There are so many things we can do, and the question really is, what is the right thing to do? Should we do? And it's really connecting with that person, finding out what they want, and giving them the freedom to make choices. And I think that's a big deal, and it's easy to get wrapped up in the swirl of technology and medicine, and we can, because yes, we can, but the question is really, what is right for that person? What do they want? How do they see their life? And giving them a chance.
You know, we were asking folks recently, well, last week we were in Shakopee and we were talking about this, about the fear that people have opening the conversation. You know, someone said, well, you're so morbid, it's so morbid. Or someone else might say, well, it's too soon. But it's always too soon until it's too late, you know. So do you have any advice as physicians as to how to even open the conversation? What's the door you need to open? What's the question you need to ask to get this started? What do you think, Dr. Sandy?
Well, there's a whole set of questions. And this is all about patient empowerment or person empowerment. You're not just treating a disease, you're treating a human being. You ask them what they understand about their illness, what they understand about complications, what they hope for, and you ask that question 3 or 4 times. Then you ask them what living well means. You ask them what their fears are, and you ask them what would be unacceptable outcomes for this disease process. It's only then that you move to talking about potential therapeutic interventions. And in a robust community where advanced care planning is done on a community-wide level, we wouldn't have to ask those questions because everybody would have already thought about them. That's our goal for Duluth.
Last word, Dr. Boylan.
Right. I think that you know, the best thing is to make it a topic of conversation, and we're getting there. And community efforts like this open up the door, and it really is rewarding for everyone.
Dr. Mary Boylan, Dr. John Sandy, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you
It's a
for
great
being here.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy.
Well, we're going to take another brief few moments and reflect on what Duluth poet Anne Glumac is saying in her lovely original poem, Stay Here. Anne?
Thank you. Stay here. Be still, I tell my monkey mind, which scampers to plans for dinner, hangs from the limbs of deadlines. Stay here, where a layer cake of cloud and light rests over the river, where the snow is painted with golden light and silver shadows. Stop worrying the frayed ends of past mistakes. Stop looking for the prize known only to the future. Watch the intermittent flakes, skittering sing-song toward the ground, visible only with the backdrop of red dogwood, dense, dark brush.
I mentioned my late friend Bruce Cramer in the introduction to our program. Bruce lived a very full and expansive life, even as his body was ravaged by ALS. I remember one day he told me that he was going into hospice, and I immediately thought that meant he was going to die, and soon. Of course, he gently reminded me that for the past few years of our friendship, he had been dying, slowly. So this move, he said, should not come as a shock to me. I had some misconceptions about hospice, as I did about something called palliative care. As we talk about living with intention now and into our future deaths, the mission of palliative care really fits, and not only for the dying. Dr. Dean Fox is with us. Dr. Fox is a palliative care specialist with Essentia Health. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure, Cathy.
Palliative care, as I understand it, because it was a little bit of a kind of a confusing thing when I first learned about it with my friend Bruce. If you think about palliative care, this seems like care that we all could use throughout our lives, not just our deaths.
I think that's very insightful, and I share that same perspective. I tell people that I think palliative care can solve a lot of the problems in healthcare, because my view of it is really helping people keep the end in mind, to have that horizon in front of them. And I think what Mike Rouse said was just really, really inspirational. I think we all have horizons that define our decisions every day, in the near term and the intermediate term, and then we have that ultimate horizon that helps us make decisions. And Mike has, as he describes it, had the gift of having that particular horizon in front of him to make those decisions all the time.
How do you help your patients? What are the conversations that you need to have with a patient? Where do you start, and how do you keep it going?
Yep. So I think the part of the decision or the discussion that I have is to help people articulate their goals and their values. I think all of us are living with our hopes and our fears just right here all the time. And people who are facing the end of their life or have a serious illness, it's more urgent for them to have that, to be able to express that. And even those of us who don't have that, I think, are always looking for someone who we can trust to share those hopes and fears with. And so my role in this capacity is to quickly earn someone's trust so that they can be comfortable sharing their hopes and fears. So it's not an intentional effort other than just creating that space that they are comfortable sharing their hopes and fears, and then embark on a discussion about their medical problems. And I always tell people that if we start with the discussion of hopes and fears, that the medical decisions make themselves. I think people realize that decision has always been there, and they just needed someone to help them find the path to that decision.
I am so glad you brought up fear because, when you have a biopsy, not knowing, I think, is worse than the worst news, right? There's that fear is just lurking. How do you help someone deal with fear?
Mm-hmm. What I tell people is that we can't choose an outcome and that you really are only choosing a care. So we don't control an outcome, and so if we can have a discussion about patients' fears, and then we can make a care plan or decisions about life and about medical care that honor those, and then the outcome is not in our control. I think so many times we think that we're making decisions because we have control of the medical outcome, but really we don't have control over that. We just have control over the choices for care that we make, and they should be grounded in what our goal is, what our values and goals, which are then grounded in our hopes and fears.
Can a patient thrive with physical health compromised? Can there be healing even if there is no cure?
I'm really impressed and pleased that you've used the word healing. When I first moved to Duluth, I saw on the billboard, "The Soul and Science of Healing." And you're never going to find a hospice patient or an end-stage COPD patient on a billboard, because those patients can't be healed or can't be cured of their illness, but they can be healed. And healing is having a discussion about their fears and goals, and then picking care and helping them have that horizon of the end of their life or of an illness, so that they can make choices, they can heal relationships. And so I don't want to compete with your end in mind, but I thought of time of grace. That I can't sign up for, I can't get excited about signing up for hospice. It's hard for me to really get excited about talking about a dying time. But if we said what I really want is to make sure that I get a time of grace, when I can not worry about trying to get more time for time's sake, when I'm not trying to get additional care because I feel like it could help or that I'm entitled to it, but rather to focus on, during that time, not only my physical well-being, but my emotional well-being, my relationships, and whatever spiritual existential questions I might have. I would give up a lot of potential added time to know that I could have that sacred time.
See, I wonder, many people think that that's not available to them, but I still think, you might agree or disagree, that there are still important things to do and important ways to be, even at the end of life.
Again, very well put. And I think the decisions that we make at the end of our lives are our most important ones. They're the ones that people are going to remember us for. So rather than thinking we're just fading into the distance, that it's the end of our physical existence, it is our legacy. And to define that time so that people can do that work that I'm convinced only happens during that time that people have identified that is near the end of their life. And that, honestly, that's what I realize that I have a visceral response to, is when I see people who are getting care, not that I think is futile, but just that I'm not convinced that they've actually chosen for themselves based on what their fears and hopes are.
What about this work feeds your soul personally?
I saw it written in an article once that I wish now that I'd highlighted and cut out, because it articulated it very well. But I think it is being filled by living in that sacred space with patients. a recent patient that I saw who was nowhere near end of life, but was having a very difficult time making medical decisions. I volunteered to take care of her because I felt like I could make a connection and help her make decisions about her care. And on the second day when I left the room, not only had we made the decisions, but she didn't say thank you. She didn't say thank you for caring for me. She said, thank you for caring about me.
Oh.
And I've had a handful of times, one not too distant past, where I left the room and the guy said to me, I love you. And so I think that's really what we're talking about. And Sir William Osler says, in order to properly take care of the patient, you have to love the patient. And I think Dr. Sandy talked about being in that vulnerable space. And that's really what it is. You know, you have to control the temperature of that vulnerability and the language you use and what you do. But it's really being vulnerable in that space and surrounding them with warm regards so that they can trust you and express those things. And it is, I think, a form of love that you're expressing to them so that they can make these important decisions.
Thank you so very much. I deeply appreciate you being here on the program with us, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
The End in Mind Project believes that art can be used to spark or fuel some of these soul-searching, often difficult and uncomfortable conversations about living and dying. We often work with artists because they have such a wonderful, unique lens with which to look at life's big questions. As a matter of fact, big and bold is how I would describe Mary Plaster's work. Mary makes amazing papier-mâché puppets and other mixed media work. She's the founder of Duluth's All Souls Night Celebration. Wow, that's amazing. Mary, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
I think Duluth has such a vibrant arts community. It is great for you to actually use art in dealing with something so frightful. How did you come up with this idea?
Well, there was a puppet and mask exhibit at the Duluth Art Institute that happened to end at the exact time of Halloween / Day of the Dead. And so we were talking about how we would do this reception, and I had spent 4 years in Mexico, and I said I'd really prefer to do something that had the inspiration of Day of the Dead rather than what Halloween has become in the United States, which is so Hollywood influenced and kind of based on violence and hypersexualization of, you know, sexy kitten costumes and things like that. So what I had experienced in Mexico with Day of the Dead was so profound, and I was, you know, in my early 20s. I had never experienced it as a child, and the open discussion of death and the building of altars honoring your dead, and it's such a sense of humor with putting their favorite foods on this altar or telling the stories of their life, and so much laughter rather than tears in
the work we
talking
do.
about legacy.
Exactly,
Right.
right. What we do, of course, it's been interesting to look at death and dying through the lens of other cultures too, because, you know, as you know, death and grief are not exclusive to any one culture, which obviously I think your work reflects.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about being an artist and using art to use it as a lens to look at these very difficult conversations? Why does art seem to work for some people?
Well, it's a very physical, very visceral experience. Like most of these masks and puppets are formed first in clay, so you're putting your hands actually into something that's very earthy and moving it around, and you know, seeing an immediate result of something that you're doing. And then there's also the part where you're satisfied with your sculpture, but you're going to do layers and layers and layers of paper, because that's what papier-mâché is getting all these layers and making essentially something cardboard, so that when it dries you can lift it off, but there isn't the weight of the clay. So in a way, it's sort of like a, you know, butterfly that lifts and takes off. And you know, so you can paint what you've made, and then you dress it with fabric, and it walks away.
Someone said that the creative process and the healing process arise from a single source. And as an artist, do you use art to make difficult topics more accessible?
Well, I think a picture really is worth 1,000 words. So if you can come up with an image, you know, it saves a whole lot. Like for me, I don't speak a lot, and I hide a lot behind these masks, you know. So yeah, for me, it's easier. I love listening to people that can articulate because it's a gift I don't have. I think
you're doing great.
But yeah, the artistic process for me is just sort of a relief. It's just more immediate, and you can say things with color and shape and movement with the giant puppets. So
and other art and music and poetry.
Yeah, so throughout the evening we invite poets and we invite musicians and singers. Well, they're musicians, but and then we also invite the public to come and build their own altars. So if they've experienced a death, they can do something along the lines of, we try to do it in an individual way rather than trying to copy the culture, but just, you know, to bring your own grief and put it on the table. And it sparked conversations throughout the evening. So throughout the evening, there's also a procession with things that are, you know, visual. Or, you know, the other piece of the event is there's not only personal grief, but there's political grief. Mm-hmm. So people are recognizing that the earth is kind of in a meltdown mode. So when they walk in the door, we ask them to write down something, you know, what do you think is a rotten idea that you would like to see die? You know, what would you like to say go away? So they write the piece of paper, and then they participate by reading the piece of paper and then burning it.
Say, a final question here. Mm-hmm. Our culture has been refusing the reality of death for decades. Because you've done this kind of work, do you feel that changing at all?
Yeah, I do. I have people, this is our 10th year, and so every year we get people that say, I'm going to honor so-and-so this year, you know, I'm going to talk about this issue, and I'm going to carry it in the parade, and I'm going to talk about it, you know, so there's a little bit of a raising of courage, especially if you can hide behind the mask too. If you don't want to be recognized, it's sort of like learning to ride a bike or something. You're practicing something before you're actually standing on the corner holding up a sign, and you know, being recognized. You can articulate some of these big beings and do it that way.
Thank you for your work. It sounds fantastic. And I love the puppets and the color and the fact that you are gathering to kind of look at some of these hard issues. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I hope this has been an hour of education, exploration, maybe a little contemplation. Even though we've all faced or will face very difficult circumstances in life, I hope you'll find creative possibilities to keep living with meaning and purpose even at the end of life. You can start and then keep the conversation going using the discussion guides available on our website, www.endinmindproject.org. Thank you so very much for being with us. Before we leave, here's another song by the amazing Galen Lee.
I don't have a name for what I want to bring you, and I don't understand what you've seen or all that you have done. But if I could bring you peace today, my battle would be won. You're weighted down with worry, you doubt what you are worth. You question if you'll ever know your place upon the earth. But if you saw what I see, this perfect person standing next to me, if you could kindly let yourself be, your battle would be won. We don't know the outcomes, how this story will unfold. We only have a moment, and it is not ours to hold. A place to fall, a time to land. We grow by grace and a tender hand. The beauty of this hidden plan is our battle has been won.